Welcome to day 2 of our Supply Chain Transparency Conference. I'm very excited to start today's conversation around the future of traceability in tech. And to start, I'd like to introduce the panelists. And so we have Ethan Soloviev, Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood, Nanne Tolma, Head of Client Relationship at Satelligence, and Leonardo Bonanni, founder and CEO at Sourcemap. So thank you, all three of you, for taking the time, and very excited about this conversation. The way we're going to organize this panel is I'm going to do a Q&A, and I have a couple of questions for all of you. And at the end, we also open the Q&A to the audience. So to start, we'll start with Ethan. So HowGood refers to itself as a sustainability database. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what niche HowGood has filled in the sustainability space and what kind of value it brings to company.
Thanks, great to be here. So I'm Ethan Soloviev, Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood, also a small-scale farmer in upstate New York. So I have a 30-acre apple orchard, grass-fed sheep and lamb operation, and shiitake mushroom enterprise. So keeping my hands dirty while also managing the world's largest product and ingredient sustainability database that HowGood has built up over the last 15 years. We track 247 different sustainability metrics and attributes across about 2 million UPCs right now. So the particular niche that we're filling is making a link between all the things that happen upstream in what some people call supply chain. I never use the term supply chain. I think it's the wrong term. I think it makes us think that the world is like a chain, or that we chain people up to grow our food, which is what we used to do, which is part of why we call it a supply chain. So I don't usually call it a supply chain, I call it a supply system. But so when you look upstream in your supply system, there's all these things that happen. There's so much complexity. There's so much to learn from satellites, from the kind of mapping that Sourcemap does. But what HowGood does is it looks at that, it understands the what, and then it interprets the so what, the what does that mean? And then puts it in a format where you can actually apply it to an individual product at the UPC level, so that you can look on your shelf in a grocery store and know what is the carbon footprint exactly? What is the water usage exactly? How high is the risk of child or slave labor in the supply system? How highly processed is this good, and what form of energy was used to process it? So our sort of crux and intersection is right there. It's taking all the what from upstream and then making it actionable and useful, both to the consumer, but then also to the brands and manufacturers who want to understand their impact and improve it.
Love it, and I will try to use supply system from now on. Nanne, next question is for you. So Satelligence wants to achieve sustainable agricultural production towards zero deforestation, zero extinction, and zero emissions. Could you walk us through how the company came to be and some of the motivation to tackle those challenging issues?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the introduction, Juliette, and also the opportunity to share my thoughts here today. So I'm Nanne, the Head of Client Relations for Satelligence. Unfortunately, I live in a boring grey apartment in Amsterdam, so I don't have my own farm in my backyard, but I'll be taking notes today, Ethan. Yeah, we were founded back in 2016, and I think at that time, satellite data was mainly used for research purposes and regional studies, but not really for operational services at a global scale. We saw the endless possibilities, though, from using this to measure deforestation, but also other environmental risks in the global supply chains, and use this basically to work together with all different types of companies active in the world. And most of us have a background in forestry, earth sciences, remote sensing, and we all have seen these issues on the ground, which I think is very important, that when you're a technical company providing these type of solutions, that you also know actually what's happening on the ground. Who are we servicing with this? And seeing these issues firsthand, I think, gave us the motivation to work on this. over the years, we've seen a change in the type of organizations we work with. So when we started out, it was a lot with NGOs using this type of data, but over time, we have started working with growers and traders, and more recently, even more downstream in these supply chains, working with consumer goods companies and also financial institutions.
Makes sense. Leo, you're next. So Sourcemap recently celebrated its 10 years anniversary. Congratulations. Could you tell us what inspired you at the time to found the company, and also what you hoped it would become?
Yeah, happy to. So Sourcemap is it's a supply chain transparency company, hence the name of the conference. And the goal from the beginning was to improve standards at every step of supply chains, and to use transparency as a way to achieve that impact. Originally, it was about consumers leveraging that information, knowing where things come from, and buying products that reflected their environmental and their social values. And then it became very clear that companies also have a right to know where products come from, and that they are very interested to find out. So we became very much an enterprise supply chain management company. We help companies digitize the whole supply chain. In many cases, we specialize in parts of the world and supply chains that have never been in the cloud. They've never been in digital systems. We bring them into a place where companies can manage them, can manage the risks, can manage the impacts, can measure things like deforestation, and we work with Satelligence on that, can measure things like carbon footprint, and with HowGood, we're working on that. And basically, put products to market that they're confident live up to their standards and to the standards of their consumers. And what can I say? It's been it's overnight success, we have many of the largest commodities in the world mapped down to millions and millions of farms, tens of thousands of warehouses, factories, distribution centers, brands, retailers, all uploading data, sharing data. So I can say that, just overnight, companies have gone from transparency being a kind of a far off ideal to something that is part of the normal way of doing business.
Love it. So to dig just a little bit into this 10 years of experience. So from the beginning, when you started to now, like in the last 10 years for you, what has been the most important technological advance for traceability tech? And also, what's the concept of supply chain transparency changed in the last 10 years?
Can I say the internet? That was the, before we started working on supply chain mapping, companies kept their supply chain data on a server in the basement of the factory where they made goods. And the supply chain was just that little visibility into who supplies a factory and then who the factory supplies to. So that's it. That was a sort of one, it was like the world before social media. And digitizing all of that, bringing it into the cloud, the fact that the internet now reaches every corner of the world, so you can have great real-time data collected with smartphones basically anywhere without limit, and then you can also basically tap into this unlimited computing power of the cloud and verify all that data. And then I think what's really shifted with transparency is it went from a sort of a nice to have for companies that were very proactive about sustainability in their supply chains to really like a necessity, because either if you don't have transparency, your competitors do, and they're using it to have, less disruptions in their supply chain. And it's really something that, governments have basically made it clear they're expecting from companies. So it went from a nice to have to, I would say, a necessity in just a short time.
Yeah, and also I'll just hop in on that. There's such a demand on the consumer side as well, right? Governments are starting to have already, will continue to regulate in this direction. So that'll sort of push up from the bottom. But then there's this pull from consumers, and you look at the demand for sustainably marketed and transparently marketed products, and those are the ones that are growing fastest and outgrowing their categories. And so it's becoming more of an imperative. Some of the bigger food companies that we work with, from Danone to Applegate Hormel and others, they're really excited about making public-facing claims about their transparency, about their sustainability, because they see that not as a risk reduction, as a bottom line efficiency driver, but as a top line driver for increased revenues in this time that's increasingly not controlled, but driven by millennials, Gen Z, even Gen A now. And they are digital native. They want this stuff. They expect it.
Yeah. No, definitely. And actually, which is a nice transition to my next question for you, Ethan. So HowGood has a great article on its website about how to eliminate labor risk, created a more regenerative food supply. Where have you seen the connection between the environmental risk and the harmful labor practices?
Well, it has all to do with basically the oppression and ownership of land and people. And so some of the places in the world where you see some of the most intense ecological damage are also the places where you see some of the worst labor risk. So you can look, there's an article earlier this year in The Guardian about palm oil in Southeast Asia. And not only do we already know that, there's massive damage, deforestation, against the biodiversity there, but then also there's a significant labor risk, human rights risk that comes into play in those exact same places. You see similar things with overfishing, where in some of the fisheries of the world, there's ecological catastrophe, 90% or more loss in the fishing. And at the same time, this is where people are being put into modern slavery and forced on boats or in packing facilities to work in inhumane conditions. So it's sort of like that environmental ecological extraction and the abuse of basic human rights. Not always, but sometimes go hand in hand. Ideally, you want to be able to see and track both, because there's some places where that's not the case, where the environment's not so bad, but there's high human rights risk, or where there's really high human rights risk, but not as high in terms of greenhouse gas footprint or other environmental damage. So this is part of why in our platform, we're working to put all of the different metrics up in front of you, so you can not do unintended consequences trade-offs by always trying to get to the lowest GHG, but then increasing your human rights risk. And we tie everything on human rights risk to the UN guiding principles on human rights, and sort of map out our metrics and spectrums across that, and also the number of people involved in it. But it's really useful to be able to see them side by side, because you can make a more holistic decision to move your company and move your products towards sustainability.
Makes sense. And talking about data and collecting that data and what you do with it, Nanne, you providing your customer with like really data-driven insights seems to be an integral part of what you do at Satelligence. And could you walk us through how your customer might use this actual data they obtain from Satelligence to make more informed decision, and some of the common challenges that your customer face? I think you're muted, Nanne.
Sorry for that. Thanks. So the insights that we provide, they really evolve basically around sustainability compliance monitoring. And I think what you still see is that there are not, let's say there's not a common sense of how to use this type of information. So that means that it's really based on who we work with and how experienced these companies are, the way that we present basically these insights. As an example, when we work with growers and traders, the focus is really on real-time detection of grievances. So this can be illegal deforestation events, for instance, to help these companies act upon it. So how they use this information is when we detect these specific events, they want to mitigate it. So you can either engage with your supplier or go locally on the ground and make sure the specific event stops. But of course, when you start working with organizations more downstream, the question is different. It's more about measuring progress towards commitments and identifying where these issues are in the supply chain and who is responsible for it. On the challenge side of things, I think a common challenge we see overall with all these different types of customers is that it's all new to them. So most of them have been adopting sustainability commitments recently. They don't have teams in place. They don't know how to monitor, how to implement this. So for a lot of organizations, it's getting used to this. And for us, and I think also for you at Sourcemap and HowGood, to educate them how to use this type of information for more sustainable supply chains.
No, that makes total sense. And talking about kind of new risk, or at least new things that's come up recently for you, Leo, this spring you testified as part of the US Senate Finance Subcommittee hearing on the forced labor in supply chain. The US government and governments around the world really are starting to crack down on forced labor, but many don't know where to start. And so can you tell us a little bit more, how do you see tech working with the government to create a safer supply chains?
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind year, certainly in terms of how seriously customs is taking supply chain mapping and traceability all of a sudden as part of how they gauge the risk of products coming into the country. Just to be clear, we don't work directly with the government. We testify and we advocate for comprehensive standards, because for a lot of companies it can be overwhelming to not know where to start. So but very simply, companies now have to know everyone in their supply chain, and they have to trace all of their products down to the raw materials. And depending on the risk of the region or the commodity that they buy from, they need to collect a lot of information to show that there are good labor practices in place at every step of the supply chain. So we walk them through that process, but then we also prepare a sort of a system of record, a standard set of reports, because first companies need to people need to not lose sleep over this and know that, in a moment's notice, they can answer a questionnaire, they can answer a WRO, they can spit out a report, they can send it to customs, and customs is going to be able to read that report, and they're going to be able to clear that shipment and clear that company. So it's a process of say advocating for a standard system of record. You think of it like a standard form that the companies know they can fill out to confidently import into the US. And then it's a matter of getting that mapping and that traceability implemented in importers. Depending on how far they've gotten, how much visibility they have today, it can take weeks, it can take months, but it's a process that it's a known quantity. So we're just trying to roll it out and get government to be accustomed to it.
My turn to be muted. On the same kind of topic, like we just talked about the US government and the regulations in the US, but Nanne, across Europe, we see stricter laws are being passed that requires companies to report on environmental risk and forced labor risk in their supply chain. And with Satelligence in the Netherlands, how have you seen laws like the EU due diligence law change on how you operate or how your clients operate?
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction, because for us, it hasn't really changed the way that we operate. It's simply because, these laws, these regulations, they were bound to happen, meaning that when we started out, we were already preparing our service to assess companies with their due diligence. But I think indeed what it does is push a lot more companies to take this matter seriously. So we see a lot of companies reaching out to us and that want to have a better understanding of how their supply chain look like, because they know these laws are coming up and they have to report on this.
Makes sense. Ethan, so let's dive into a little bit more about on the traceability piece. So with what you've seen with your clients or in your ecosystem, like, do you believe that supply chain or like supply system traceability will become a must-have for doing business instead of doing something pursued by select few very visionary company? And if so, what needs to change? What do you think needs to change in order for that to happen?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's almost the same link that we did last time from, yes, there's the regulation happening and that is going to push things along. But at the same time, you see these customer facing eco labels popping up all over the place. So EcoScore in France, used by some of the biggest retailers in France, is just sort of putting this information right at consumers' fingertips. In the US, one of our partners, Ahold Delhaize, uses our sustainability ratings, rankings, and attribute system right, in their e-com environment, on shelf's edge. So there's this drive, again, from both directions towards transparency. And I can tell you from our partners, both on the retail and the brand side, that the companies who are disclosing more, who they've done the work to figure out, they've used something like Sourcemap, they understand in a greater level of detail where everything's coming from and what the practices are and what the impacts are there, then they have something to share and communicate to a retailer that it helps them get into a retailer, but then it also helps them communicate directly to customers. So it won't, I don't think it'll be pushed just by regulation. I don't think it'll be pushed just by altruism and people wanting to do the good thing, though I would hope that more of that would happen. I think it'll be driven by the markets. I think this will become, basic costs of doing business, because when you know more about your supply system, you can tell the story about it. And we have proven over and over again that consumers will buy more when they can see more attributes, when they can see more transparency, when they can see more insights into the overall, sustainable nature of a product, whatever it is, they will go for that and buy more. So I think yes, it will definitely happen. What needs to take place in order to move in that direction? It really takes a concerted effort holistically inside the companies that are making the decisions. So there's sort of linkages that need to happen internally. It can't just be a sustainability person. It can't just be one person in the procurement side. It needs to be a connection between procurement, marketing, R&D, sustainability with C-level buy-in. And C-level basically just needs to say, yes, go, we need to get that. And then coordination internally to make it happen. That's within a company, but you need that same network effect happening beyond an individual brand that's doing it. You need that connectivity to the suppliers all the way down to tier N, and you need that connectivity to the retailer so that the retailer is excited to get what you are gathering from further upstream. So that's what I think it takes. It takes some people really willing to step into it, invest in it, not because it's the right thing again, but because they're going to have a better top line and bottom line because of it.
Yes, no, completely. And digging a little bit into that with Leo on how do you get there once you have that buying, we can all agree, or we've seen it many, many times that many companies have very few visibility past tier 1. And you raised it before with issues around forced labor and the compliance component that's coming now more and more. Could you share with the audience a little bit more on how can company better engage with their suppliers that they were previously unaware of? And also on the second part, how can they feel confident that the data they receive from those suppliers is accurate?
Yeah, I mean, look, the good news is that this was a lot harder 10 years ago. Asking suppliers to be transparent about where they get their raw materials, for suppliers to even know where they get their raw materials, that was all a tall order. Now, the good news is today, so many major private sector actors are requiring supply chain transparency as part of the bidding process, the supplier onboarding process. They need to know for a variety of social, environmental reasons, but also just to make sure they're going to have dependable supplies. They need to have transparency on where stuff comes from. So if you're new to the game, you're riding on, that wave has crested, and now it's the easy part. Most likely your suppliers are already getting requests for transparency, and they're able to fulfill them, and just giving them a standard format that they're already accustomed to, which probably the one we sent them, is the fastest way to get them on board. There's a ton of ways to incentivize suppliers beyond that, but nothing works as well as saying, I require this of my suppliers. Beyond that, we've seen everything from companies co-investing in building capacity, especially in smallholder, remote, rural supply chains, actually, buying the smartphones, buying the software, providing the trainings, providing staffing, providing incentives. We're seeing distribution of planting materials. If there's agroforestry needs, we're seeing, co-investment in new machinery to use less energy, use less chemicals. So there's all sorts of, I leave that to the buyers. They are very good at this, better contract terms. There's all sorts of ways to reward transparency, and not the least of which is, there's also a lot of premiums that are getting paid for traceable goods because they're so much less risky than goods where you can't pinpoint exactly where they come from. The second part of the question is a heavy one. Now that we have all this data, truly enormous amounts of data from supply chain transparency in a supply chain, it's super important to verify that data automatically. So part of it is enriching it with collaborations with companies like HowGood and Satelligence, because that takes your raw supply chain visibility and it immediately tells you, is there a fire? Is there literally a fire in your supply chain? Anything going wrong? So bouncing that data that you've collected automatically against all of these very powerful databases to gain insights right away. And then of course there's a whole bunch of reconciling that we can do with AI and with various machine learning algorithms just to clean it up. And just think of it as the way that your tax preparers do it, the way your credit card detects fraud, the same kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, all you should really be focusing on are those few places where you have risk and those few places where you need to really engage deeper with your supply chain. We don't want all that data to get in the way of impact.
Right. So switching now to Ethan on all that data and especially some kind of risk around greenhouse gas emission. Do you feel like the average company is aware of how much greenhouse gas they produce? And how can we get more company to invest in this type of technology to better understand the impact, especially around climate?
Yeah, no, the average company is not very well aware. If they are aware, they've taken on a scope 1 and 2 type exploration. They've checked their electricity bills and they know what the carbon footprint of that is. The hardest thing for many years has been tracing back up into your scope 3, especially scope 3 purchase goods and services, and seeing what is the impact of raw agricultural production. 65 to up to 95% of the greenhouse gas footprint of any product that you see on the shelf came from the upstream farm to gate agricultural activities, especially having to do with land use change, soil sequestration, carbon opportunity cost. And that has been, held in the hands of a very few, very intelligent, brilliant life cycle assessment specialists for a long time. And to get that data and to study, it can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single product to get a full life cycle assessment done and all the, details that's needed for that. So we need to democratize that data. We need to put greenhouse gas emissions factors into the hands of thousands and thousands of decision makers. And we can do it by combining the actual traceability tech that Sourcemap has with the 15 years of agricultural research, especially agricultural and other extractive industry research that HowGood has done, where we have 33,000 different ingredients, chemicals, and materials, and what their greenhouse gas impact is. So in our SaaS platform, it's as simple as typing in the materials that go into a table or a health and beauty product or the ingredients in a food formulation. You can type it in and within seconds have an output of what is your greenhouse gas footprint at a pretty good estimate, 80 to 90% accurate. You can then refine it and go further to add in specific sourcing locations, specific practices on the ground, specific standards that you have, and that will further refine it all the way to the point where we're soon going to be automating carbon labeling for products based on the data that you have in the system. So you could just click print and it'll put out a 1.63 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram for this product, just like Oatly did, just like Unilever announced that they're going to do this year, and 40% of their food products next year. So while the average company is not currently aware of it, they're going to be soon. And I think the individuals, and the entities that lead and say, oh, we're going to get there first, we're going to put that carbon label on pack based on this data, I think they will capture more market share in their particular categories.
Which is super exciting. Talking about, I think you touched on something super interesting, which is decision making. And so, Nanne, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about how do you feel, how do you think, sorry, traceability can become a tool for strategic decision making? Because this, at the end of the day, is what makes things change. And how do you see, of course, Satelligence rising to meet that need?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll also repeat a bit what Ethan and Leo also mentioned earlier, but what traceability does, it gives you better insights in your supply chain, and in the end that will allow you to make better sourcing decisions, and especially it gives you an advantage over your competition, especially now that we see that transparency and sustainability are seen more as an asset. So when you communicate about it, where your product comes from, what you're doing about increasing the transparency and traceability in your supply chain, that's a clear asset. And we also see that coming back in the use of the information. So a couple of years ago, we mainly worked with sustainability departments, but now we really see that also traceability and information that we provide on environmental risks becomes more part of procurement departments. That means the departments that are in the end responsible for the sourcing, they start incorporating sustainability data to make better decisions. In the end, then what we should do as a company is support this and also help shape basically these implementations at these procurement departments.
Makes sense. And I'd like to continue on traceability with you, Ethan. So traceability is a word that is used by many different people, and they do not always mean the same thing for everyone. So I'd love to hear from you on how you define traceability at HowGood, and can or should anything be done to further define it in general?
In some ways, I'm going to respond, but I'm going to pass it to Leo, because I remember Sourcemap put out a really good, clear thing on the difference between transparency and traceability that I totally agreed with when I saw it. But my thought is, you can't always get full traceability, whatever your definition. You can't always get full transparency, whatever your definition is. You don't have the exact life cycle assessment for every single ingredient in your chocolate bar or in your yogurt. You can't get all the way down to that level of detail. If we needed to go and do it, Sourcemap makes it a lot faster, but it's still going to take time. And if you have a big company, if you have thousands of ingredients, thousands of products, it's a huge amount of work to get all the way to the final details for all of that primary farm level data. In the meantime, you can't not make decisions. You can't not just say, and this is actually, unfortunately, some of what's happened in the last decade is people have said, well, we don't really know. It could be this, it could be that. We're not really sure. So we're just going to wait and maybe do some research and maybe get some more data, but we're not actually going to make any changes in our supply system. We're not going to make any changes in the formulation of our products. And that, I think, is a mistake. We have enough good basic information. Even if the only thing you tell me is sugar, I'm going to tell you most likely where it was produced and most likely what the risks are in that. If you tell me cacao, I'm going to say you probably have the risk of child or slave labor in your supply system because 70% of it comes from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, and that's likely where you're sourcing from. If not, great, you can tell me and learn a little bit more detail. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't say, if you've got cacao, if you've got sugar, there's likely to be some labor risk inside of it. Knowing that, you can start making decisions and prioritizing resources for where you go and get that deeper traceability, for where you really want to check if deforestation is happening. And that high level understanding, we should just be providing much more broadly to decision makers across the board so they can figure out where do I want to invest for that deeper level of traceability that's possible.
Love it. And Leo, I'll let you also jump in on the traceability definition.
I totally agree with Ethan. I think of it as a best practice, right? It's like quality control or anything else that you do at your company. You aim to achieve 100%, and along the way you reach that goal. You find issues, you resolve those issues, you move ahead. So it's look, what you see is mapping is just figuring out who's in your supply chain. Traceability, it involves a lot more data. It's actually tracing the physical goods, every transaction, so that you could take a container that arrives in Long Beach and know exactly every single farmer delivery that went into the cotton gin that made the fiber and the fabric for those blue jeans. So it's much more detailed, much more deliberate, and it's really I would say to Ethan's point, it's on a need basis. So if it's a high risk region, it's a high risk material, you're going to want to go to traceability right away. It'll be able to surface instantly whether you're getting a clean bill of health for those shipments, whether that chain of custody is verifiable. You don't need to implement it everywhere all the time. You really just think of it as anything that's posing a significant risk to your business. That's what traceability is for. Mapping and transparency, those are much quicker, much less data. You just need to know who you're doing business with, and then you need to share that information either with your customers or with consumers. And that's become almost the norm. Like Ethan said, consumers are expecting it, especially the new generation. If you can find out everything about everyone all the time, you should definitely be able to know where the products you choose to buy are coming from and who's making them. And so I think the all of these together though it's only a matter of time before everybody has to engage in some level of traceability and some level of transparency. So it's a good idea to start now if you haven't.
Awesome. So let's find a question for one question for every one of you, and then we'll open it to the audience. Leo, following up on that, as the supply chain industry has continued to evolve, how do you see Sourcemap growing and changing with it?
I mean, look, this is we finally get to go from a place of keeping people from losing sleep over what might be happening in their supply chain to knowing what's going on in the supply chain, and then now enriching that supply chain visibility with all of this data. Some of it is making sure you're not putting your business at risk and you're pulling out or diversifying your supply base from where it is today, anticipating future risks. But a lot of it is also just positive impact, right? I mean, with deforestation, we always forget to talk about all the amazing agroforestry work that's being implemented, and looking at it, watching it on satellites. With carbon, we're always assuming there's a negative, the carbon impact is bad, but there's a ton of regenerative practices where you can produce things and actually, reduce your carbon footprint. So I think we're going from, a place of just risk mitigation and compliance to a place of optimization and positive impact. And along with that, a lot of companies are going to find ways to go to market in a bigger way with more traceable and more sustainable products.
Ethan, so this year we've seen some pretty dire reporting on environmental risk due to climate change. Can you share a little bit on how do tech and data play into this increased effort to be more environmental conscious?
Wow, so many ways. I mean, I think all the way from the upstream, actually knowing what your impacts are, as we were talking about earlier. How can you work on climate change? How can you really set a scope 3, a science-based target, if you don't have a sense of what your scope 3 is, even at a quick estimate level? So there's that side of it, but then there's also all the way down to, I don't know, you look at what Chipotle did. We partnered with Chipotle as a big restaurant chain, and they're communicating things like grams of carbon saved and milligrams less antibiotics used and square feet of soil health improved. Every single time you click and buy a burrito there, you get a little receipt that gives you that information. So it's really, taking climate change from this big, abstract, scary thing that in many cases, at least in the over-industrialized world, like the US and parts of Europe, it seems like it's somewhere far away. This year, fortunately, has woken us up out of that with the flooding and the fires and everything that's happened. It's like, oh, it's actually here. So it takes it out of that big, abstract, scary thing and makes it into something very tangible that anybody at any point in the supply system can see and touch and understand and see, wow, here's how I could have an impact on that. So it's this, I think, omni-channel awareness is one big piece. But then the next piece is, how do you use that awareness? How do you use that data to make better decisions? We think there's a lot of potential in artificial intelligence coming. And in the meantime, we've got great human intelligence that you can use if you have the data in front of you to read the patterns and make better decisions to improve your product. So I also think, I'll put one last thought here. There is a future when a decentralized ledger technology, blockchain technology, Internet of Things will add, 10x, 100x, 1000x the amount of data available. And that will be fascinating. We'll get a lot of really interesting stuff coming from that. And we're not there yet. right? The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So we will see as that starts to come online, a huge amount more information, but it's not quite here yet. You don't need to jump to a blockchain solution. You can do a huge amount with your own good human intelligence and the type of tools that the companies on the phone here today provide.
Awesome, and I'll make sure to check my Chipotle receipt next time I go buy a burrito. And so Nanne, for my last question to wrap it up, so we talked about just climate right now, but as we know, deforestation is a major contributor to climate change. And now that more companies are at least becoming aware of it, of their contribution of this problem, do you feel like we are heading into the right direction?
Well, if it's the question to wrap it up, it needs to be positive, right? So I guess no. So no, yes, definitely. I think we are moving forward, but it will take time, and probably more time than we are comfortable with. I think I want to share an example of positive change, and it can actually be found in a commodity everyone despises, the palm oil industry. So what you see in palm oil, that it has been under public scrutiny for over 20 years, and rightfully so. But it also means that the sector there is quite far ahead in terms of all the topics that we talked about today. And what we see after all this time, after all these years, we see the positive effects of a mature roundtable for sustainable palm oil, for instance, but also policies that have been implemented. And we now see the effects in Indonesia, Malaysia, especially Malaysia, the two countries with the largest production of palm oil, where we see deforestation decreasing, and quite rapidly. And especially in sensitive areas, a lot of positive programs are starting up. But of course, this is just one example, and it needs to happen on a larger scale, of course, especially looking at specific commodities like beef and soy, where we still need to take a lot of steps. And the first steps have been made, but to see these effects, to see these positive effects like we see for palm oil, it will take time. But hopefully laws and regulations that are coming up now will help with that and quicken the process.
Awesome, and thanks for leaving us with a positive note. So now you will open the floor to the audience with questions. So feel free to add them in the Q&A chat. I see already a lot of questions coming in, so we'll try to cover all of them. So the first one, mostly for you, Leo, but definitely open for Ethan and Nanne as well, is how do you support transparency in supply sheds that require a lot of aggregation processes and lots of other type of middlemen?
Yeah, look, there's nothing new under the sun. We need to know what goes in, and we need to know what comes out at every stage. If it gets blended, aggregated, or processed, that just means we lose a little bit of resolution. But at the end of the day, you know, there's no tolerance for any kind of major fraud or labor. So even if it's just one of 100 farms that's supplied into the shipment, and they all got blended together, that's enough to taint that shipment. Just like if it was, you know, like a recall for food or pharma. So we take it very seriously, and you know, what ends up happening is suppliers make things in smaller and more segregated batches, and that way they de-risk their customers. And you can, as soon as you start asking for this kind of data, you'll get a much more clean chain of custody for your products.
Yeah, maybe just to shortly add to that, I think for us it's really depends. So the challenge that we mainly have is that we do the satellite component really well, and we have gathered a lot of data for specific commodities, but it is how do we facilitate the process to help companies with all the commodities that they're interested in. And I think a key part in that is sharing information and insights with other companies, or have partnerships like we have set up with yourself, with Sourcemap. And that will definitely help to building more reliability in this type of data.
I can take that question that came in from Phil Swallow.
Go for it.
Okay, great. So the question is around, how do you see supply system transparency, traceability being impacted by the conversation around financial materiality versus impact materiality? So we're starting to see this happen. I think it's going to be a little bit of a slower game for that to catch up fully, but we're starting to see it happen. For example, earlier I mentioned the UN guiding principles on human rights risk, and that is a impact focused, not a volume or financial focused approach. They say you don't kind of weight your supply system by how many metric tons you're buying. You say, where are the most severe risks to human beings? And even if it's only a tiny bit in your vanilla, or it's a tiny bit over here in a, some other flavoring or fragrance, you do need to look there because you have to address the greatest severity first. I think the social and human risk side of it, we'll see more of that. But as we go and as the data becomes available and people can see those different types of materiality side by side, I do think we will see double, even triple, more complex as we go. We already have that in life cycle assessments for greenhouse gas emissions and other things. We look at economic allocation versus mass allocation. So I think people are used to seeing it through a few different lenses. The point isn't that any one of them is the right way and you should only do that. But the point is, can you look and see the different possibilities and still have the data to make the decision towards whatever is important for your company, for your country, for your consumer?
Oops, sorry. I think there is also another question for you, Ethan, specifically is, what is the process of updating your ingredient database, e.g. adding like a new ingredients, and do you have different scores by geography on the same ingredient type?
Oh, absolutely. So there's 33,000 different ingredients, chemicals, and materials in the database. It's all driven by source location and then tracked through the different processing locations along the supply system. And each place based on the different characteristics, whether it's labor risk or water scarcity index, is going to be different when I'm growing an apple tree in California versus where I live in upstate New York. So all of those geographic differences and that sensitivity is really important and is built into sort of the backbone of what we do. We love new ingredients. I think we've got most of what's out there, but I was working with a company that was interested, it was a pet food company, and they were interested in some new novel proteins. And I said, oh, I think we've got all of them. And they're like, well, what about black soldier fly larva as a protein source? And I said, okay, we don't have that one yet, but we'd love to add it in. And so anytime, a new supplier or a manufacturer has something interesting and new, we're constantly adding new stuff into the database. And more suppliers, even some of the biggest suppliers in the world, are proactively coming to us and saying, hey, if we've got, a bunch of brands and thousands of people every day who are looking to figure out, what ingredients do I use from what suppliers, I'm going to be proactive in giving you more data about where this soy comes from, where this, sweetener comes from, so that you can communicate it to the brand. So I think this is really going to, gosh, I was going to say pick up steam, but that's the wrong metaphor. This is really going to start like a tree growing really fast in the coming year.
Very exciting. And a question for all of you. What are some of the biggest pain points presented to the panelists here by fashion companies and industry when it comes to traceability? There seems to be a lot of greenwashing, partly driven by apprehension to be open about their supply system. Leo, maybe you can start, and then I'd love to hear all of you on this.
Oh, sorry, I'm
You're
looking
good.
at the pain points. Look, so the fashion industry enjoys a particularly complicated supply chain because the turnover can be so high. So every season they could have a completely new set of suppliers. So I'm just going to keep on harping the same point. So even more important to have traceability, because if you map your supply chain once a year, by the time something happens to an apparel supply chain, those products have already hit the shelf and the supply chain doesn't exist anymore. So you need to get ahead of that. The way we've seen it work the best in apparel is when traceability is part of the supplier selection. When you get a sample for the fabric you're going to use, ask where it comes from. That way, when you place the order, you already know what supply chain you're buying into and that the goods are clean and good to go.
And sometimes it's that simple. It doesn't have to be like a complicated 80 question survey. You just say, oh, where's this coming from? Exactly. Like sometimes some very, we found there's a couple points that were made in the questions along the way here that like, it's hard to get information. It's very opaque. There's a lot of secrecy. And that's true. The legacy of the industry has been that. It's not going to last for very long. And those who try to make it last, they're going to be out of business. But sometimes it's just asking the right targeted question at the right moment, and just a simple response can help a huge amount. It can take you, from 10% understanding of what's happening up to 80% understanding just with a single question. I think that goes for fashion, but basically any other, product or material out there, there's versions of that.
Thank you. Nanne, I don't know if you want to add a point to, to what's already been mentioned.
I think it's relatively complete. I just, the only thing I wanted to add maybe is that what we see then in some cases is because a supply chain is seen as such complex that companies might not even try to reach this level of traceability because they either see it as too difficult. So I think that's some of the things that we see, and also in fashion, but also similar supply chains.
Awesome. Well, I think it was a great last question. In case you didn't see in the Q&A in Zoom, Ethan, Leo, and Nanne replied to your messages. So if we didn't just answer it for everyone, you can see the answers in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for both attending and then also for our speaker here. Our Marisa will speak in a minute about our next panel. I think it's a little later today. And thank you again, both all of you, Leo, Ethan, and Nanne for this panel.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming and good questions.
Thank you, Juliet. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.